So yes, there was definitely a lot of resistance. And for a small island country like Samoa, when it comes to technology, it's very hard for our local people to accept the idea of using technology in their everyday business operations. So that was one of the biggest challenges for us, was to try and address these concerns. As you may be aware, before, I mean, Samoa is definitely has a large cash economy. Still do a lot of things manually. So it's changing the taxpayer's mindset. That was one of the main challenges for us. Not only with the taxpayers, but even internally within the ministry. Because, mind you, we were also learning as we were implementing. So, you know, but the way in which we dealt with this is that we definitely, and I do acknowledge DTI's, just attitude towards implementation is that you actually helped us implement in a successful manner because the commitment that CTI showed in terms of even putting together the materials, the training materials, helping us identify the roles and responsibilities of our internal staff, who should be involved in the committee to make sure that implementation was very committed, which I must say is very rare because, mind you, this is only one of how four systems that we use at the ministry. And one thing that I've actually picked up from DTI is the commitment that you have that to ensure that our internal processes really benefit from the use of the tax invoice monitoring system. But that was one of the biggest challenge. And I'm sorry, I failed to mention earlier that one of the analysis that we had conducted back in 2019 was looking at the tax gap analysis. And what we identified is that there's definitely a lot of the risk of underreporting was very high. And how we did this was we looked at the number of registered taxpayers and then the number of returns that they were actually filing. And there was a huge gap, huge discrepancy. And that's how we realized that, the difference between what we should be collecting through tax revenues and what we were actually collecting at the time, there was definitely a huge gap there. And we saw that the deliverables of the tax invoice monitoring system would help us address that risk, would help us solve that risk. I can honestly say that implementation of the tax invoice monitoring system has contributed to the increase in our revenue collection. And I say this because in the midst of the COVID pandemic, we were actually reporting an increase in our VAGST collection. So what happened was that once taxpayers were aware that we were actually monitoring their sales, they started declaring the actual sales in their tax returns. Just knowing that now there will be a direct linkage between the transactions that they have on a daily basis, and we would actually be able to capture it in the back end and are actually monitoring it. This really changed their mindset as well. And I must say I honestly feel like taxpayers are now more aware of the tax laws, because before, just sorry, it's a little bit of a backstory here in Samoa is that we always have that mentality where taxpayers come, apply for a business license, and then they just go on operating the businesses with very little commitment to actually comply with the tax laws. And then came this project, TIMS, and now we were actually capturing their sales on a day-to-day basis, and all of a sudden they were now paying closer attention to our tax laws. So I think that's just another change in their behavior that I've actually honestly noticed ever since we've implemented TIMS. A success story from the perspective of a business is that so one of the large companies in Samoa, our tobacco manufacturing company. Now, this particular company has the largest contribution to our excise taxes. Um, and ever since implementing TIMS, they've actually given us feedback as to how much more analysis that they could also do because of the information that's available to them on the taxpayer admin portal. Is that this is all evidence based, and they could monitor their sales, and that has really helped them. Which the same case as well, I must acknowledge the commitment by DTI, because this is one of the first lot of companies, large companies, that we had to deal with. And because this is a company that was part of an international chain, there were actually some difficulties during accreditation. And what happened was that DTI team was actually on board trying to adjust to the time difference so that they could work together with the developer of the AFD components that this particular company was using, and managed to come up with a non-transferable accreditation type to suit the business nature for that particular company and make sure that it's fully compliant. Now, the success story from the perspective of the ministry would be the detection of sales underreporting. And I can say for a fact that we've had a number of audit cases where we have detected deliberate underreporting by a few of our large companies. And the result of that was that these companies had to come in and pay for the shortfall, but also the penalty that was applied um, for their underreporting. So those are just some success stories. Tax compliance has definitely improved. And I reiterate the fact that taxpayers actually now make an effort to read our tax laws and comply, because just knowing that now the ministry has this tool to monitor them on a daily basis, it actually influences their behavior as well. So there's definitely been more interaction between, before we actually had to chase down taxpayers. So, because they weren't filing on time, they weren't paying on time. And we didn't have the resources to put together evidence to pursue, further actions, enforcement actions for these taxpayers. That has definitely changed since the implementation of TIMS.